Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining me on this Lunch and Learn. And today I'll be discussing a little bit about Jetpack Compose basics, and then we'll also do a small demo at the end. So basically, to begin off, just to give a small introduction about what Jetpack Compose is. It's basically a modern toolkit that Android Studio just basically introduced for creating and building our user interfaces. So obviously, I'll be elaborating on exactly what purpose it is, why it was built, why it's better than the previous libraries or methods that we use to create our Android user interface. But just to simplify or just to introduce it, basically, Jetpack Compose allows a lot of simplification and acceleration from the development side to create basically user interfaces. And the way it does it is everything is basically created in the form of Kotlin language. This is something which we will be exploring in today's discussion, and I will be showing you how that works. So a few features that we can say is of Jetpack Compose is that initial one, it is declarative. So when we say declarative, it just means that it simplifies a lot of the small components that you have to add whenever you have to create your user interface for any kind of Android application. And it embraces Kotlin, which means we are completely using the style and ergonomics of the Kotlin language. Interrupts with views. So this is something which people who are familiar with Android will know that currently views and layouts are basically being used in the creation of our UI. So we can combine this with Jetpack Compose and use that in our future applications or in the current applications that we already exist. So moving on, I'm just going to show a small snapshot of a screen. Since obviously Jetpack Compose allows us to create a user interface, I just wanted to give a small idea for everyone so that they can understand what basically we mean when we are trying to create a particular user interface for the screen. So you can see over here, we've basically divided the screen into small parts. And in each part, you can say there are more components within it or more units within it that we basically have to create. So the purpose of dividing this into different parts will be a little bit elaborated in the next slides when we actually start creating these units using composable functions. So what basically used to happen before, or what still happens currently in the Android development framework, is that in order to create your user interface, we use XML layouts. So just to explain briefly, XML is basically a separate language on which we create our particular layouts. And then within the Android application, we use activities to basically define dependencies between those layouts you can use find view by ID, and then there are other methods to basically do this. So my purpose of basically adding this into the explanation of Jetpack Compose is we will see that how these XML layouts are now being replaced by Jetpack Compose and what advantages they will basically give in the development side of your application. So after XML layouts, view models were basically introduced. The purpose of that was to separate the UI logic into a separate file so that the interdependencies between the XML files and the activities could actually be separated into a different, you can say, class file, and actually create a separation of concerns between the XML layouts and the activities. So in order to do this, we know some of you must be familiar with the concept of data binding and view binding, which is basically used to connect the view models with these layouts. So what's happening now is quickly coming onto this screen is that we have completely removed the XML layouts in Jetpack Compose, as you can see, and this is created in Kotlin. So previously, we were using a separate language to create these layouts, but now, as you can see, everything is within the same language, and this actually introduces a lot of a lot of less amount of code that has to be written, and also a lot of more Kotlin APIs that can be incorporated into creating these the UI screens. So now I'm just going to come back to the basic screen that I showed you before, and I was saying that we can separate a user screen that we have to create into different components. So today I'm going to show you how we can make a simple component as a part of a screen, and using this Jetpack Compose. And once we make it, we can not only use that function again within our application, but also in other applications after it has been created. So, right. So now the basic concept behind creating user interfaces in Jetpack Compose is to use composable functions. And the composable functions are very simple, just regular functions in Kotlin, but we just have an annotation of @composable in the beginning. So I'm going to give a small example of this on the slide, and then we'll move on to Android Studio, where I can actually show you how these composable functions will be created. So as you can see on this screen, it's a very simple way, just add composable annotation. Then in the same way that we define functions for the Kotlin, and you can pass in any kind of parameters that you need. Then we are using a text function, which is provided by the Jetpack Compose library to basically display any kind of text on your user interface. So before we move on to this, I'm going to go back to Android Studio so we can actually implement this and see that how it can be incorporated into our apps. And if anybody wants to ask something in the meanwhile, or if you want to keep the questions in the end, you're most welcome to do so. Okay. Okay, so I'll continue with this. So now basically what is happening is, like I showed you in the slides, we basically have composable functions in order to create the user interfaces using Jetpack Compose. One important thing in order to understand these activities, I'm just going to quickly go to how you can create a new project over here. So if you click on this, you can see that on all of these basic layouts or default layouts that Android Studio provides us, we can click on Empty Compose Activity, and this will basically bring us onto this screen. So in order to explain the basic layout or the format of how we will be able to create this screen, I'm going to, you can see that initially we have the same main activity that we have in regular Android applications. Then we have the onCreate. And the only thing that is changing within this context is this set content function. So the purpose of this function, or this block basically, is that it's basically where all of the compose functions that we want to incorporate into our application will be defined. So this basically defines that. Once we move out of the main activity, we can define any number of composable functions according to the requirement of our application or the activity screen or fragment screen that we are creating. An additional thing that Jetpack Compose basically provides us with is something called @preview. So the purpose of this @preview is that we can basically, anything that we are creating on our screen, we can simultaneously preview it on this particular screen. And we do not need to actually run our application all, again and again in order to see whether our user interface is following the guidelines or the layouts that we wanted it to follow. So so as I've explained this preview section and then explained what the purpose of this set content was, this is where basically all of the composable functions will be defined. And it's simple, like I said before, we just have to define the name of it, and then we can use multiple functions that Jetpack Compose provides us to create this. So I'm just going to, over here, add another text in order to give a bit more of visualization of how these are working. So as you can see, we had on the first text, I just added another one. So in order to view it on this preview, I'm just going to do build and refresh, and So you can see over here what has happened is high travel scale has also been there, but it's on top of the text element that was there before. So this is actually what I wanted to I wanted to show that why this is basically happening and what we can do to fix it. So the way that Jetpack Compose functions are basically provided to us is that they are they whichever format you define them in, they will be displayed in exactly the same sequence as those within your function. So basically, we have to explain, or we have to use different properties to show a Jetpack Compose that this is exactly the way that we want them to be organized, or in a horizontal format or vertical format, and different methods that we can use in that way. So just to give a more visual element to understand what we were talking about, we can basically, since the purpose of now that we have to do is to create a kind of layout in which they're not on top of each other or in a specific arrangement, we can use some predefined composable functions that are given to us in order to create that separate kind of layout. So one of them is called column, and just going to add it over here. And what basically column is going to do over here is it will allow us to arrange these two texts in the form of a column. And once I refresh this, we can see they are basically arranged in a column format. So just to visually understand exactly what was happening in this, I've also showed it on this slide over here. So the column function is basically allowing us to place all of these are different components of our layout in basically a column format. So that means they will be stacked on top of each other every time you place them within this column. If we, so if we want to change it to a row, same way, we can just define it into a row, and then all of the elements within this will be arranged in the form of a row. We also have some other arrangements like box and scaffold. So those can also be incorporated into your layout design. Just to show you that how row will basically show if we want to change this to row, we will just quickly do a build refresh, and on your default preview, you'll be able to see that these text elements are now in the form of a row. Okay, so this is great. We can define them in the form of a row, a column, a box, any of these formats that we want to use. Now, the question is that how can we make this a little bit more in terms of its design? How can we add in more elements to improve the design and make sure that they are working well with what kind of output or what kind of screen we want to make? Okay, so in that respect, what we can do is that Jetpack Compose provides us with something called modifiers. And the purpose of these modifiers is to actually, they're using the word decorate, which is great because basically it allows you to change the composable size, layout, appearance, or even add some things like interactions, such as making an element clickable. And I'm actually going to do that in the coding, so you can see how these modifiers can be incorporated into it. There's a long list of modifiers that can be used for using when you're creating your layout, and all of them have different purposes. So let's look at some of the modifiers that we can use for this particular example, and how we can basically improve our layout using them. Okay, so right now, we just have a column with two texts. Obviously, images are an extremely important part of creating your user interface. And the basic way that Jetpack Compose allows us to do that is is by using this image function, and it's basically a very simple function to use. We just have to pass a few arguments in it, and one of the arguments that, or one of the methods that I'm going to use in order to do this is by using a painter resource. So, sorry. Did someone? Okay. Okay, so in order to use the Painter resource, what I can do by adding this into my into basically your my in this layout file is that when we have access, we can have access to different kind of drawable files which are available over here. So any kind of image that you want to add, you can then access it using the resource folder over here. And this will allow us to add this into our application right over here. And so going over here, Painter resource, I'm just going to do I add on the code and explain to you on the way if there's anything too confusing. So we have a tribal scale image over here that I can add. And then once this has been added, we also have to make sure that we define a content description. And for this, we can just say it's an image description over here. Okay, so basically what this will do is add an image into your file layout over here. So we can build and refresh and see whether it's all working fine. So here we have this tribal scale image or logo that I added in, and you can see that the arrangement, since it was in the form of a column, so that's how we are able to see all of these components. Okay, so I'm going to change this into row so that we can make it more like a chat message that I was trying to create. And once we refresh this, we can see that in the form of a row, you can have your image over here, and then you have your two texts over here. So for the text, I would like them to be in the form of a column. So nothing too complicated. We can just add them into our column layout, and that way they will be, so they will be arranged in the form of a column. And as you can see, once we build and refresh, this looks a bit more better. This is kind of what we were looking for. Okay, now this has been added in, now we just have to use different kinds of modifiers in order to change the sizes of the images or any kind of padding that we want to introduce around it. In order to do that, what we can do is using this function, using these components provided, we can add some modifiers. And again, the purpose of the modifier is just to enhance your component in the way that we can make it visually more according to what we wanted. So one modifier that I'm going to be using over here is the padding one. But just to give an idea to everyone, these are the different available modifiers that we can use in order to change our layout. So there's a lot of options in that respect, and according to what you want to make, you can add it into your add it onto this particular layout. So for padding right now, just to give a small example, I'm going to say, or I want a padding of 8 dp around this whole element. And this is the syntax in which we basically write it down. So once I do a build refresh, we will be able to see that around this whole row that we had defined over here, we are now able to have some padding around it. And since I was using the all, I was selecting all, so it's in equally divided all of that. We can also do it as a top, bottom, specify anything if we do not want it to be all. And accordingly, you basically will, sorry, so let's just build that again. Yeah, the padding will change according to whatever your requirement is for your particular layout. So very simple way to just add some of this. Then coming to the image, right now I want to make sure that we can make some modifications to this as well. So I can, again, in the same way, just add my modifier over here and add any kind of changes that I want to make to this image. So this will be slightly more interesting. Sorry. So this will be slightly more interesting because we can make some kind of borders around it. We can change the shape of our image. We can change the size of it as well. So For this particular case, I'm going to first of all just define maybe a size so that we can have our image maybe a little bit more larger. And what we can do is once we do build and refresh over here, you will see that the size of the image considerably increases. So if this is too large for us, we can just go back, change it, and you can see that as we are making the changes, and you can preview it onto your default preview simultaneously over here. Okay, so the size has been done. One more thing which I'm going to do, which is very, very useful, especially in creating layouts these days, is that we have a concept of clipping your image into a particular kind of shape. So if I want to convert this into a circle shape, I can just simply do dot clip circle shape over here. Once we do this, you can see that this becomes into a circle form. And if we did not want to do a circle form, I know that rounded images are extremely popular over these days as well. So we could also do a rounded corner shape, and we'll just have to provide how much the corners we want to be rounded in this case. And again, once we do a build and refresh, your shape becomes rounded in this particular way. So this is we have lots of modifiers that we can use on over here that previously when you were using XML layouts, it could be a bit tricky to actually implement it and do it. But in this case, we can see that you just need to add any modifier that you want according to your layout, and you will get the desired output in that respect. So one more small modification, or what I wanted to show feature, is that if we want to have any kind of like spacing between some of these elements, we can basically use a function called spacer, which will allow us to add spacing, as much spacing as we want within this layout. And for now, for this purpose, I'm just going to add some on the width side. We can also increase the height spacing as well. So let's make this a bit separate so it's a bit more visually possible. And then build and refresh, and you can see that we have now some spacing of this particular width right over here between this. So right. So this was like just to show that using a few lines of code, how we can keep on editing and easily be able to modify our layout without having to go back to any kind of XML layouts and changing any kind of values in that respect. So this is extremely, I think, easy way, or you can say, especially for a developer, intuitive way to be able to build your layout based on these different functions that Jetpack Compose is currently giving us. So, right. So moving on. So before I do move on, I'm just going to ask anyone if you want to ask any questions regarding this. And then there's another concept that basically wanted to show you, which is basically lists, which actually allows us, or is a replacement of recycler view in Jetpack Compose. But definitely before that, if anybody wants to ask anything, you're most welcome.
So I have a quick question, actually.
Yep,
Is it possible to move the modifiers into constants just so that they don't clutter up the UI code?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to define, you can just define them over here and not have to write it again and again. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, you can do that. Just simply like in the same way that we use functions, and you can move your variables around in that way. So you can actually do that as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyone else, or? Okay. So the next concept which is, I think, one of the most one of the best features, you could say, besides the rest of the things, is that Compose allows us to also create a list of items using very simple functions called lazy column and lazy row. And this is the behavior or the set of principles is the same as that we used in recycler view. So I know lots of people will be familiar with recycler view in Android, and even though a lot of it was boilerplate code that is used in the recycler view, but sometimes it can become a little bit tricky, or you can say complex, to implement that. So to simplify things, we can now use a lazy column, and in order to show this, I'll just define a new composable function, so that we can get a more accurate view of how we can use this. Okay, so I'm just going to call this conversation, since we were following the chat message format, and you can call the function any name you want. It's completely up to you. And then we can add in this lazy column. And so for now, what I'm going to do is just use this items to define define the same number, use this, message card, and replicate that in the form of a list. Of course, we can use any data class or anything else that we view model to show these elements as well. But for this demo's sake, I'm just going to basically, we can call your message card, and in this you can pass in anything. You can, if we want, we can just say tribal scale over here. Okay, so what this is doing is, before I build and refresh this, I'm just going to show that we just had to define this tag called lazy column. Within that, we are defining our items and passing in any kind of function that we want to have, basically the layouts that we want to be displayed in these lazy column. And when we refresh this, hopefully everything's working fine. Let's just see if it is, or did I miss any kind of...
The preview notation, I think.
Oh, no preview notation, but if I have missed something...
I think it's because you have to call the conversation as part of the preview.
Oh, yeah, thank you
Because you are
so much.
calling the message card. No worries.
Absolutely, absolutely. So obviously we can see that this is dull, so that it's not being really called anywhere. So what I can do is, in the preview, I'm going to absolutely have to call it. I'll just comment this out, since it will be they'll be like clashing with each other. And then of course we'll also have to call the conversation function over here as well. And right. So let's do a build and refresh now, and you can see that now we have a list of items over here. So the question would be, for everyone who uses recycler view, does it work like a recycler view? Is it a scrollable list? Yes, it is. And I'm going to show you on the emulator as well. Oops. So that how basically we can view this in the form of an actual list over here. So hopefully this doesn't take too long. Right. So here was your list, and you can see that it's scrollable depending upon your items. It works completely in the same way as a recycler view, and you can define all of your elements or items in it. And if we want to change the layout, and instead of a lazy column, we want to make it into a lazy row, we can also view that as well. First of all, if you want to see it on the default preview, you can view it here. And now you can see that these elements are in the form of a row. But when we look at it in the emulator, it will give us a better idea. This is your row, and it's actually scrollable. So you can have different elements, images, or anything that you want in the horizontal arrangement in the row format. Okay, so this is great. Now, one more thing one last thing actually, which I wanted to also show, which is really interesting and can be incorporated into the Jetpack Compose, using the Jetpack Compose, which is animations, because obviously we know that all the Android applications that are being made these days, animations is something which is really important, or we can, really makes your application much more modern and draws the users towards it. So this is something which has been extensively improved upon or used in Jetpack Compose, so that it can be easily done, and you can add as many animations or better animations in your application. So for today, I'm going to show a small animation in which what we can do is when we click on the message, I just want the text color. We can change the text color of that particular message. Obviously, there's different kinds of animations we can do. We can expand the size of the message, or we can change the background color as well. For now, I'm just going to do text color so that everyone can have an idea of how that can be done. Okay. So in order to do that, we're going to be using two important functions of Jetpack Compose. One of them is called remember, and the second is called mutable state of. What these functions basically do is the remember, as the name implies, basically remembers the value of that particular a variable, which is mutable, or that the state of that variable. And based on that, the changes, using a simple if condition, we can do the changes. And what will happen is that the composables will get redrawn, and this process is also called recomposition, if you're interested in the technical terms of how this works. Okay, so coming back to here, let's see how we can add this into this particular example. I'm going to just move this back to column so that it's more visually apparent, and we can see the actual list of items over here. Okay, that's great. So now what we want to do is we basically want to introduce a specific variable, which will be which using the function called remember, we can keep track of its particular state, and we can actually use this in our program. So for this particular case, I just want that when I click on these text or one of these texts, the color basically changes to a different color, so the user knows that it's interactive or it's being used. I'm going to add a variable. We can call it anything we want. We can call it as color, and what we next need to do is we're going to use by remember. And once I've written this down, I'll explain it as well, what basically we are doing in this. So the remember function basically will remember the state of your this variable that we are passing in. And so initially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a value of false, and this will basically this value will basically be remembered by Jetpack Compose, and using that we can just do some if conditions going on to that, and define that what should happen if it has been clicked or if the change happens. So over here, I'm going to, since I want to change the color, I'm going to say if the color is changed, which means like is color. So since we are tracking this variable, whether if its value basically changes, I want to change the value, the color of my text. So material theme is something which can be incorporated into Jetpack Compose very easily in order to define your colors. And I'm going to add it over here, and then give a brief description to everyone about how that can also be added into Jetpack Compose. So for now, I'm just going to simply be using two different colors using the material theme, and you can define them yourself. You can do it in any way you like. So just for simplicity's sake, we're just going to add this and to make it a bit more visible. So what basically I did, I said that if this variable is color changes, let's change the text color to the primary one. Otherwise, we can just go back to a secondary one. But in order for this to actually happen, we also have to define like when it should happen. Do we want it to be clickable by the user or any other kind of, we can say like any other modification in that way. So again, over here, I'm just going to define the modifier, and the modifier will allow me to make it clickable. So this is the one I'm going to use. Over here within the clickable, we want to keep track of this variable and see that if it's so if it's equal to, if it's false, we'll make it become true. If it's true, we can make it become false. So either out of the other ones, based upon that, initially it's going to be false. Once the user clicks on it, it becomes true. And based on that, we can also check over here that what kind of difference that will make in our basically animation over here. Okay, so just going to make sure that everything is working fine. Looks like I'm missing something. Okay. Right, so just going to quickly check what I've been missing over here. So color, we have, if it's color, this is working fine. And we have the remember one. Okay. Right, so
should this color be one modifier of one of the texts?
Oh, sorry.
Or
Actually, there's just a comma mistake, of course. So sorry. So when I was defining or within this text, basically, it should be part of this text with the comma. So yeah. So small mistake over here. So what we needed to do was define it within the text, because this is the text color that I want to have changed, since it was outside of that. So there was no way for the compiler to know that which color I was basically talking about. Thank you, Felipe. Okay, so now we'll quickly run this and see how this animation is working. And what basically is that when we click on it, I hope if it's visible to everyone. So when you click on it, the color changes. When you click back, the color goes back to it. So this is a simple way of adding an animation into this, and we can, add different kinds of animations using this remember and expanded one. And yep, that's something which can be easily incorporated using Jetpack Compose. One important thing before I move off from Android Studio, all of this was, if you can see, created in like very, very few lines of code. So this is something which, if we had to replicate this in using the XML files in Android, like the way it was done before, it would have been considerably longer amount of code that had to be used, and lots of also dependencies would have to be established in order to create that. So quickly going to go back here and see, right, one last thing that we can, I'm not going to show it in the demo, but just to let everyone know that the flexibility of Compose is that we can also add Compose into your pre-existing application. So if you already have views or fragments or view layouts, Jetpack Compose provides us an easy way of basically adding a Compose view within those layouts. And then you can simply define those add composable functions by adding them over here using a compose view, find view ID. And so what this allows us to do is that slowly, step by step, convert any pre-existing apps which have been made in XML over onto the Jetpack Compose framework, right? So this was it for today. There's a lot of elements, a lot of topics more in Jetpack Compose, which I wasn't able to do today, but if anybody's interested, or maybe next time can be explored as well. So they have theming, they have a separate way of doing navigation, lots of more animation styles, and the state can be discovered, and then testing mechanisms as well. So yeah, so thank you so much for right now, and over to the questions that anybody wants to ask. And related to this, or any further things that want to be explored in this respect?
So I have something. It's not so much a question, but a comment. So thanks for this, Sehrish. This was really cool. I actually worked in Flutter for about 2 years, and Jetpack Compose is really close. Like after seeing this, I feel really confident that I could actually go in and probably learn this pretty quickly. So yeah, this is cool. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. I think lots of people who come from the Flutter domain say that it's very much similar to that as well. So that definitely gives you an edge that if you do know Flutter, you can easily move on to Jetpack Compose. But one thing is that Android Studio really really encourages to use Jetpack Compose, because this will be the future of applications eventually, since the complexity which exists, or the bugs that are created due to using different kinds of layouts, will be something which we want to move away from now.
I have something just to comment to. So thank you again for sharing all with us. So there's something that is really powerful here too, is that in the you see that Sehrish just share one preview, but for example, imagine where you are building an application using like also the dark mode. It's also a way for you to test how your application is looking on when you use dark mode too. So you can have like two lookings in the same screen whenever you do a change. So and even it's more powerful because there's more combination where, for example, you have like items on a row that have a different icons, and you can still see in that preview. So you can add as many previews as you want, and also changing them to be dark. So it's really powerful, and you can play around even without running on the emulator. So yeah, it's really cool.
Just to show what you mean by that, I can quickly just, it would have been a really long session, but there is a whole theming concept in Jetpack Compose in which you can define your, like Sebastian was saying, your dark theme colors, your light color themes, and they allow you to change your theme accordingly. Also, according what the preview, in the preview section, you can have separate previews for showing for your dark mode and this. So you can have as many previews as you want. So I can duplicate them and show a dark mode theme as a light mode theme, any other elements that I want to have on the screen separately. You can keep on doing that according to your requirements. You can add on to these previews.